everyone. Welcome to everyone in the room and everyone online. I'm so very grateful to you for taking time today to be here. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Marziah Karch, who, as many of you know Marziah is a student in our PhD program. She started the program in 2012, and she came to us well-educated and with lots of professional experience that certainly has served her well in her doctoral program work. Marziah holds an undergraduate degree in art from the University of Kansas. She earned the IDT degree here at Emporia State, master's degree. When she came to us as a doctoral student, she was working at Johnson County Community College as an educational technologist. And most recently, she has been a senior instructional designer in the Professional Learning Department of the Northwest Evaluation Association, which is a global nonprofit educational services organization known for the flagship intern K-12 assessment known as MAPS. I mean, I'm sure many of you know it by that name, Measures of Academic Progress. One of her achievements while at NWEA was to launch a new early literacy tool that measures reading literacy, comprehension, and decoding skills. Today, she's going to talk to us about her dissertation topic that you see on the board. Serving on her committee, Dr. Brendan Fay here on the front row. I served as the chair of the committee. And on the line today, and you can see her on the screen, is Dr. Kyungwon Koh, who is an associate tenured professor at the University of Illinois School of Library and Information Sciences. So good morning, good afternoon, and welcome. So we're so glad you're here. Thank you for making time.
On the camera, you look
Sorry about that. We'll follow our typical protocol. We'll hear from Marziah, then open it up to questions from the committee, the administrators, the Sloan faculty, and anyone else in the audience. And so, unless there's something more that we should address before getting started, I think we're ready.
Jerry's coming.
Okay.
I thought it was 1:30.
It is 1:30.
But we're gonna start it.
Well, my one says it's 1:30. So, well, he'll be here, I'm sure.
Yeah, he was here 30 minutes ago, and then.
Oh, he was?
So,
Oh, I'm
that's
sorry.
what I'm
Well,
saying.
sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry. Indeed, I am sorry for that. If there was a misunderstanding. But we're talking about the graduate dean, and I do expect he'll be here. Okay. Okay.
ready to get started. So my name is Marziah Karch, and my proposal is on the information behavior of women in independent game design, which when I tell people that, they say, wow, that sounds great. What does it mean? So we're going to get into that. First off, I'd like to thank my community members, Dr. Dow, Dr. Fay, and Dr. Koh. Thank you so much for being on the committee. I would not be here without you. It's been an honor, and thank you so much. So to get started, the overview of this presentation, we're going to talk about the research problem, purpose of the study. We'll get through some definitions, some themes from our literature review, theoretical framework, research questions, methodology, timeline, limitations, and then I'll have time for any questions that you may have of me. So to get started, let's talk about the research problem. This is a picture that a friend of mine, Doug Patterson, took when he went to a game developers conference. And I think that the picture speaks a lot. If you look at the crowd without even seeing any faces, I think we can identify some characteristics here of the participants. You know, just offhand, what would we say that the predominant gender here is? We can also make some assumptions probably about the race of most of the participants here. You know, that you're looking at probably a very homogeneous group. And in fact, when you look at industry data, that is true. It looks like about 24% of game design professionals in their survey, which is an industry survey from the International Game Developers Association. 24% identify themselves as women. The majority identify themselves as men. That's 75%, I believe. And the 3% either did not identify themselves or did not identify as a binary gender. But that's very heavily men. And you could look at that and say, well, maybe just men are interested in playing games. But when you look at who plays games, that's not actually the case at all. That men and women play games at much closer, you know, it's not 50-50, it's like 48% women, but it's pretty close. A lot of women play games. What Pew also found that men were twice as likely to identify themselves as gamers, meaning, you know, their identity was more tied into that, and that may skew the perception. However, the design industry, it's all men, making games that are primarily targeted at men. Some researchers have pointed out that they're missing out on a lot of valuable, you know, money if they wanted to market to people that clearly are interested in playing games. When you look at race, it's also, you know, it's predominantly white, 75% identified as white only in the game design industry. But that's not as skewed if you consider that 60% of the US Census is white. That's skewed, but it's not as skewed as the gender difference is, with 52% of the population being women. And I'm sure that if you look at it intersectionally, you're also going to find, you know, even more skewing that way. But the big problem that I'm looking at right now is the gender difference here. If you look at the computer science industry in general, that's actually pretty close. About, according to Girls of Code, about 24% of women are in the computer science industry. They estimate that in 10 years that'll shrink to 22%. Women who enter the industry tend to drop out, but they are in general not interested in entering the industry in the first place. One interesting contrast there is that this data for women in the game design industry is actually increasing. You know, 24% sounds very low, but that's actually much bigger than it was just a few years ago. So that's something to watch is are they able to continue that momentum? And when you ask the industry, it is of interest. That's, you know, in that same survey, they see that, you know, sexism in games, sexism in the workforce, lack of overall diversity. It's something that they are interested. You can see that there's more, you know, from 2016 over 2015 that they're more aware of it. They do identify it as a problem. So it's a problem that they're interested in solving. And then the purpose of this study is to better understand the information behavior, gotta get out there, of women in the independent game design community, including students, hobbyists, and professional game designers. And we'll do that by examining a gender diverse selection of participants in the PIG squad, which I'll get into that in definitions, the game design community in the Pacific Northwest. Looking at the gender and independent game design, it's not a problem in terms of, but it's also information use, information seeking, information creation, and information needs. Now that's both things that are externally observable, where you get behavior from, but also that's understanding it in context and not necessarily observable per se, such as information needs. Okay, so now getting into definitions. So AAA titles, which I'll talk about just a little bit more, is an industry term for the big games, the big popular entertainment titles that spend a lot of money, that are done by commercial studios with large budgets, available on massive platforms with a lot of marketing. Independent game design, on the other hand, is outside of this mass commercial market. For the purpose of the study, I've used Garda and Garbazik's definition of it, that they consider a game to be independently designed if it is either financially, creatively, or publishing, in publishing independent from a large studio. Creatively independent meaning that they're just designing for themselves and not designing with a mass audience in mind, or financially that they're funding it themselves, using Kickstarter or some other mechanism, and publishing their printing things through a mass studio. Oh, I had a few more definitions. I'm sorry. How do I get back? There we go. Okay, sorry. So STEAM, I wanted to define that just because we hear the term STEAM in educational circles and think of it as science, technology, education, art, and math, and that's not what I'm talking about. What that is an independent publishing platform that people can download games for their PC on, or the Mac, and it's massively popular, and it's a way that both independent and AAA titles can be published and downloaded, sort of like the Google Play platform or the Amazon platform. And a game jam is that's a game within a game. For a lot of independent game designers have these game jams where they get together. They're like co-jams or other areas where you have a problem that you're solving. So with a game jam, typically the structure is over a weekend. They on Friday night pair off in group up into teams. They introduce a problem that they don't know beforehand. So the topic of the game jam is, for instance, I had one of the topic of it was communication. So go, or Earth is alive. Go, and people develop a game, or as close to a game as they can get over the process of that meeting. Only the topic in mind, and sometimes they'll end up developing it further and releasing it, but a lot of times it's just an exercise to learn something new and to get together and to know more people and to learn new skills. The reason why it's significant is because that's an instance where a lot of information behavior is happening that can be observed, and everybody's in a close observer. So I will get to that later. The other is the PIG Squad, which stands for the Portland Independent Game Designers Squad, and that's an organization in Portland designed around independent game creation. So to dive a little bit deeper into AAA titles, I just wanted to show this. I just pulled it up, screenshots from Microsoft's website. So that's why they're all Xbox titles in this case. They're not necessarily all AAA titles are Xbox, but it's a good example of just what's currently available, what's popular. You see some themes like there's a lot of esports where you play virtual sports players. Zoo Tycoon, you simulate creating your own zoo. Disneyland is family title. Assassin's Creed, definitely not a family title. A lot of these really high budget. One notable It started out with a couple of people making a game that they thought was cool about, designing pixely blocks, and it became a massive hit. So one thing we should talk about are the themes from the literature review. Games can be entertainment, as we've seen, but they can also be used to educate, to communicate, and to offer artistic expression. And the reason it's important for libraries, I think I should touch on, is that libraries are already using games. They're already using games to teach. I'm sorry. And they're using games often as a candy coating to get kids into coding, especially targeting groups like women and minorities that are otherwise disadvantaged. When librarians make their own game, by the definition you do this, they are actually independent game designers, so they are involved in this process in a way. When Dr. Koh on my committee studied these, they were using Scratch, which is taught, it's a tool used to teach game design, developed by MIT, and it teaches game coding of something I could develop. Indie titles. So these are just they're award-winning examples, so they're not necessarily the typical example, but we're talking about in terms of the variety. So over here we have Super Meat Boy, which is kind of a typical entertainment title that we have. Meat Boy is the protagonist who, for whatever reason, doesn't have a skin, and then the game is a series of well-timed jumps and running to avoid the traps in order to go rescue Meat Boy's girlfriend from the villain of the story. Then, on the other hand of that is Analog: A Hate Story, which was designed as an interactive story that mostly it's looking at the still screens. You start out as looking at a ghost ship and trying to solve the mystery of what happened here. So it's mostly a series of small screens of art and text. She was inspired by the Chosen dynasty of Korea. That what if the society had somehow kind of evolved into that, and it talks about gender roles and marriage and LGBTQ relationships. And kind of an interesting one. Then we have the Stanley Parable, which is it's a game-based game, so a lot of it is around a series of rules. In the game, there's a British narrator who narrates what the player is going to do. We're going to open the door on the left, and the player can choose whether or not they do that or they do something else. And so it plays with the idea of narration and narrative design inside of games. That Dragon Cancer was designed by a father who was experiencing the warrior battle and eventual death of his son from cancer. And so he created this interactive story to talk about his experience and generate empathy for what they were going through. And it's also an example that games don't have to be fun, and they aren't always fun. There's nothing fun about that game at all. Push Me, Pull You is a cooperative game where each player plays if you can see here, they play like the half of the head of this kind of long, weird, two-headed person, I guess, that can go and against other players. So there's two-headed players of 4 players in total. It's cooperative. You have to coordinate with the other person if you're going to move the thing. The body just kind of stretches out and it's weird. And you have to agree on appearance in some ways, because the skin tone shows a collective. So that gets further into the nature of indie or independent game design. The reason it's even possible to find these games is because of technological shifts. Previously, if you wanted to make a platform game, you had to figure out how to produce enough of them, how to distribute them in stores, how to get through the, for platforms, how to use their software and hardware, which, had a lot of expensive equipment in order to do that. Video, which it was a very expensive process. But because of technological shifts now, pretty much anyone could make a phone game. Pretty much anyone could make a game that's distributed on Steam or another platform. And the big platform games like the Xbox and the PlayStation have also opened up so that independent game designers can distribute games that way too. In addition, physical games has their transformation. That they can have the purchase funded by Kickstarter. They can have small print runs. They're now distribution places, or they can distribute, even though it's a physical game, electronically. And I wanted to point out that there's not necessarily the same distinction between a digital video game and a physical game. That you may be distributing a PDF electronically. You're certainly using technology to create them. And then there's VR games, augmented reality games. Right here I have an example. This is a card game called Japan the Game. That's designed to teach people how to use grammatically correct Japanese. And you notice that each card has a QR code on it. That you take your phone, you scan in the QR code, and it tells you pronunciation. So even though it's a physical game, there's definitely a digital component to it. When independent game designers design games, oftentimes they'll start with physical things in order to help that process, such as cards and dice, because it's a lot easier to rapidly prototype using physical things. And sometimes one of the challenges would be going to physical game instead of designing a digital game. But within the community, definitely there's more often a digital game as the output because it's easier to distribute that way. So AAA studios recruit from indie game designers. They buy indie games outright. They figure out ways to promote games. A portfolio from somebody who's made a lot of indie games will make them attractive to be hired in the community. That's important to know because there are relationships. So studying independent games is a way to study something that will eventually trickle up into our studios. Some competencies in looking at the literature are development. Business, definitely businesses that are going to make money from it. Graphics design, in addition to that, music. There are a lot of competencies that you either have to work around or with other people to get to, or figure out a way to make it a shortcut. So a lot of games will use deliberately retro graphics, for instance, so that they don't have to think about how to use graphics. One of the ways that game designers often is by modding, copying, and coding other games. I like that game, I'm going to make a version of it. Or I like Minecraft, I'm going to go in and I'm going to figure out a mod for it. Or Skyrim is another one, I'm going to figure out a mod for it. Some researchers looking at that think that may be one of the reasons that women lag behind in participation, is that maybe they don't have the same experience with modding, copying, and coding that get them a jumping point into entering into game design. So as I touched on earlier, that the purpose of games and the purpose of game design, they're interconnected here. So we're looking at entertainment and development, but we're also looking at education, social change. James Donovan, for instance, made a game called The World Without a World, discovery. The example of that is a game called Fold It, which was designed to figure out new ways that specific proteins can fold. An artistic expression. So this isn't just looking at, you think of games as being somewhat frivolous, but they're really very big, and potentially affect all aspects of human communication. When looking at gendered games, game design is obviously dominated by men. They're marketed to men. Women characters in major titles are often, sexy, strong, and secondary. Women are less visible as gamers. They're less likely to identify as gamers, and they face harassment when they play. And women are more likely to avoid platform and multiplayer games because of that. As I was mentioning earlier, it creates a barrier to learning game design online because if you're not playing the game, you're not interested in learning it. And also, gendered assumptions about women can inhibit efforts to help women. Looking at Harvey and Fisher, they looked at the Difference Engine initiative in Canada that was designed as an incubator to develop women as independent game entrepreneurs. And they found that the problem was that a lot of they assumed the wrong problems that they were trying to fix. A lot of they assumed that, women don't understand technology, and that was not the case. They had social barriers that they wanted to overcome. They also found Jensen and Fisher and Haskell, so Fisher and both looked at middle school game club and the behavior of the girls in that club. And a lot of times the assumption is that women like more cooperative games and more competitive games. And what they found is actually what that assumption may have been is that as the girls were learning the game, that a common learning behavior would be to cooperate more. Oh, let me show you how to do that. No, you push this button over here. But as they become comfortable with the game, they became more competitive because then they had a worthy opponent, and that was how they were learning. So one of the big incidents that happened within the game design community and with games in general was Gamergate, which began as a series of an ex-boyfriend of Zoe Quinn decided as a deliberate act of revenge to post some rumors, which spiraled out of control in an incredible way. It began as a series of isolated acts of resentment, but it fed into, white male resentment within the alt-right community in general. Breitbart News took up the cause. It became this challenge between social justice warriors and people who wanted ethics in games journalism, which it really wasn't. It was always it was about sexism and toxic masculinity. Women had job threats, lost jobs, had to cancel appointments at conferences. It became a huge thing, and it also spilled into academia. The Digital Games Research Association Conference had a fishbowl conference as part of their academic presentation that blew up into this backlash against academics and cultural Marxism, feminism, etc. A similar backlash is also happening, you can see now, against the science fiction community, against the movie entertainment industry, against the comic book industry as they attempt to diversify. There's this backlash of, no, you can't take that away from me, that's mine.
Dr. Koh, can you hear us now? Do you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you
Is
hear
my
me?
audio not coming through?
Can you hear me better now? Hello?
No.
Let's try. But they can hear us. Hello? Do you mind speaking to her? Just.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay. Okay, there we go. I see that the time is going anyway, so I need to get through this. So then let's look at the theoretical framework. When I look through all of the information theories that we had, the only one that made sense actually was radical change. And that's looking at Drezong's theory of what happened as digital landscape changed, that youth books changed to accommodate that, and that information behavior changed in turn. While looking at her base, those are when she studied the youth literature, all the people that read those are adults now, and Dr. Koh further expanded on that, among the behaviors that she noticed were visualizing, remixing, tinkering, and a sense of empowerment. All of those can be seen in the game design community, and I feel like that's a continuation. So my questions and my methods are based heavily on starting with Dr. Koh's research as the base point, and then expanding it, and looking instead of a youth population, looking at an adult population, and focusing on women in this case. I also need to briefly mention cultural hegemony. An expansion of that that was identified was the hegemony of play, meaning that the domination from the top down in the games industry of men is kind of self-perpetuating. And it's something we've just kind of consented to and allow to happen, but doesn't necessarily have to be in that case. So looking at the research questions, what can librarians and other educators learn from independent game designers about improving opportunities for women in the sciences? These, the sub-questions are based on Dr. Koh, how do independent game designers act independently? How do independent game designers perceive themselves and others? How do they socially interact with others? How is the information behavior of women and independent game designers different from men? And how can radical change theory be applied and further developed to explain adult information behavior in the digital age? And this hopefully will create a robust environment for women in sciences. So the methodology is looking at qualitative case study. In this case, we've got a population that is relatively new to academic research that we don't know a lot about. And in that case, qualitative study is very appropriate so that we know where to further ask questions. I'm looking at multiple methods to collect data. I want an online survey, looking at having that survey be available for 1 month or 100 questions, whichever comes, 100 answers, whichever comes first. And that's because the survey is entirely qualitative. I didn't want to do Likert questions in this case because I feel like that would still be guessing and we wouldn't know what we needed to know, that we should really just take this entirely qualitative. I want to look at semi-structured interviews with an intentional sampling of 10 women as a target. And of those 10 women, I'm going to do my best to pick the most diverse sampling that I can. It's an intentional sample. knowing the constraints that I am in the Pacific Northwest, and that, you know, it is somewhat demographically challenged, but I think that we should hear from as many voices as we can. And then I want a game jam observation. So I mentioned previously game jams as an opportunity for everybody to be learning something new and information behavior in process. You know, I can observe right there and ask questions and say, okay, how is this happening? You know, the data will be analyzed with the narrative analysis, inductive analytic coding. We're looking at Kraftwell's recommendation using Lincoln and Guba, and that's a team analytic method. My dissertation committee will, in that case, serve as my team. It's a method using rereading an inductive process to find patterns and themes. So timeline, I would like to start as soon as possible. First with surveys, then with interviews. I can have that time overlap because I don't have to actually be asking anyone anything when doing the surveys. And the observation would be the final. The latest date of that is I know for a fact that a game jam is scheduled January 25th to 27th. There may be one that comes up earlier, but the one that is definitely on the calendar and will not be canceled because it is international is on that date. And I have talked with the Pig Squad about this. They are completely on board with every aspect of this. Coding, we begin as soon as I start collecting data. I'd like to have as much of that organized as possible before the observation, and then, you know, add that in. My target is May 2019. Limitations, you know, as case study and qualitative, it's limited to one geographic location. You know, participation may be low. You know, I'm hoping that it's high, obviously. And as I mentioned, the Pacific Northwest, the ethnic and racial diversity is already low there. So it may continue to be low in the participation, although I will go through every effort to make sure that it's not the case. And, you know, as always, qualitative methods are not intended to be generalized beyond the study. So, any questions?
All right, so we'll follow our traditional pattern, and we'll start with the committee members. And Dr. Fay, would you like to go first? And then Dr. Koh, and then me, and then to our administrators.
Sure. So I guess I just thanks very much for the presentation. First, I really enjoyed it. A couple of comments and I guess at least one question. So as you might remember from previous discussions we've had, it seems to me there's really two strands to this project. Mm-hmm. One is the independent gamers mm-hmm. or independent gaming community strand, and the other being the gender mm-hmm. strand. So I guess I just wanted to reiterate the importance that you're clear on what the implications are of navigating those two different strands. So I mean, so for example, you mentioned several times, women are disproportionately represented in gaming. Are they more or less represented in independent publishers versus, say, these flagship publishers like BioWare and some of those other ones? Do you know offhand?
So it's kind of unclear. So the industry data includes both indie and AAA titles, but it's likely that participation is lower among indies because they may not be earning any money from what they make. Hmm. But I know that from going to Pig Squad meetings, there's definitely still a gender gap in spite of their efforts to increase it. Hmm.
I'm just imagining you could almost envision a situation where the barriers to entry are less for independent game companies than the flagship ones.
Right.
Because there are less structural things in place that act as a brake on welcoming this population. So another question I had, since you mentioned that the gaming jams were going to be a place of we're going to gather some primary data. are those game jams representative of the independent companies as a whole, or does it attract particular sectors of those within those organizations?
That's also a good question. I suspect that it attracts particular sectors just because of the nature of having the time to spend an entire weekend dedicated to that. If you were about to launch a game, you wouldn't be able to do that.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess my only comment there would just be sensitive to that reality. So
Right.
That whatever you find out, you might have to preface it by saying, this attracts these are only hardcore gamers that go to these places. I mean, I sometimes imagine, if you work for a gaming company, how could you not love being a gamer? But I guess that's probably not true, right? You could work at a distillery. It doesn't mean you drink whiskey, right? Okay, and then my last question. So there was a slide where you mentioned, I don't know if you can bring it up, having to do with your research. One of your main research questions about women as game designers, and one of the important takeaways of this research being that it can shed light on understanding the work life of women in the sciences.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what slide that was in. I don't think that's it.
No, I think it was further other direction.
So towards the end.
Yeah, so this
Okay,
one.
okay.
So I just have a simple question. What makes women game designers a worthy population for better understanding women in the sciences versus, say, women CEOs of Fortune 500 companies or women general managers of symphony orchestras or something, right? What is it about this particular group that you see as distinctive?
Well, first off, they're available, but looking at the population of women in game design in particular, that population is actually going up, and women in computer science in general has been going down in spite of really good efforts to try and attract more. UCLA just recently, their game design graduate program was majority women, which is unheard of in computer science right now. Whether or not they stick with it remains to be seen. I mean, that's a longitudinal study.
Right. We'll talk more about this. I want to give other people a chance.
So, Dr. Koh, would you like to go next with questions?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. And first of all, thank you for having me online. And I have to admit that I just missed the first half of your presentations because of the mic issues. So I didn't hear your intro and lead review, but I read your proposals. So my question will be based on that.
Okay.
So I think you've made it very clear about the importance of studying women, the gender gap in the game design. What I'd like to hear more about it is why it's important to study information behavior of women game designers, not other aspects of women in game design.
Well, I think first off that, since this is a library study looking at information, is the most appropriate angle, but also because I want to make sure that I think that we understand that there are social aspects, that there are issues with working in a gendered workplace, but looking at, for instance, the study of middle school students, that we found that the assumption of what information they need was wrong, that what they really needed was exposure to the game, and it wasn't a nature of, oh, well, women need more things about cooperation because that's what they do. So what I want to do is tease that out and find out, are we looking at information? Or are we looking at purely social? And part of that is to look at the information behavior.
Yeah. So
It's old expression, so maybe that wasn't
right. So yeah, it would be great if we hear maybe information sciences that you have to focus on information. So why information?
I'm sorry, could you
I have
repeat?
another question about the literature review. So you have a lengthy, rich review, but again, I feel like I need to hear more about. So what do we currently know? Like, what are the current knowledge about information behavior in women game designers? What do we know and what we do not know at this point?
What we don't know is a lot.
Yeah.
You know, there've been a few looks at information needs for game design in general. But you know, independent game designers as an information using group is actually relatively understudied. You know, we have a lot on games and what those games look like. We have a lot on players and what the players look like, or how to teach game design. There's a lot of literature on that. But you know, the emergence of independent games as a subsystem and what the information behavior of those players is relatively new to study.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I have one last question about like your theoretical framework. So like, I'm just delighted that you're using radical change theory. But besides my excitement, you introduced a couple different theories here that you might be able to use. Do I have a list? But you have other like social theories, like social capital and different theories. And I wanted to hear how you select radical change theory over all the other theories. What made the theory relevant, the most relevant one to your work?
So at one point when I was trying to think about what my topic would be in my proposal, Dr. Dow like said, all right, we're going to have a meeting and you're going to have a theory. So I went through, we've got a book that summarizes, you know, information behavior, you know, information theories, like, you know, it just summarizes like pretty much all of them known to used in library science. And I went through and I read every single one of them. And radical change was the one that made the most sense for what I was observing. And I was you know, looking at your research, I was touched with the similarity that I saw in the independent game design community in terms of remixing things and you know, visualizing and sharing and creating. It just seemed to make a lot of sense that was what I was looking at.
All right, thank you. Absolutely delightful to hear.
So I will just ask this as a way to give you a chance to talk a little bit more about how can what you are likely to uncover in this study be useful to librarians and information professionals as you understand it now?
So, you know, libraries, you know, already use games. They already teach games a lot of times. You know, I think that libraries need games, you know, as a part of their mission, but independent gamers need libraries as part of their mission. Dr. Fay earlier was talking about how, well, you know, libraries have been really successful at recruiting women. So maybe it's the game design needs to learn, you know, from the libraries and not the other way around. But I would contend that libraries have been successful in recruiting a lot of women by outsourcing a lot of the computer science. And maybe it's time to fold a lot of that back in. And that's, you know, teaching women, you know, involving women in computer science is critical to that mission.
Thank you.
I believe this is a great choice for information seeking behavior, kind of parents is seeking research, and it's a less researched area kind of group. But since you are actually part of the group, and I'd like to see you kind of little bit inclusive in terms of methodology, like
Okay.
explicitly like a ground theory.
Mhm.
Based on ethnography, you are part of that group. And
Okay.
so not only solely depend on 10 interviews with women, but you kind of mentioned you will observe one session or
Yes.
1 week, I don't know that duration. And so as much as possible, kind of beyond that, you have been there.
Mhm.
So your recollections, your kind of recorded whatever the emails or the observations, the diaries, it can pull out
Okay.
and then kind of construct your own kind of theory. That's ground theory basically. And you
Mhm.
mentioned in the page 45, I kind of write down inductive analysis process, which is actually based on your kind of overall data. So in that sense, there have been a lot of ethnography researches on information behaviors.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like among scientists or kind of particular scientists, like quantum theories, kind of their behaviors, or like cancer researchers and other kind of everywhere small group. So my suggestion should
Okay.
be to kind of include those aspects and kind of case studies, as you said, is kind of design, and you are actually categorized. I mean, absolutely, it's qualitative research, but then kind of narrow down methodology.
Okay.
You probably choose ethnography or ground theory as a
Mhm.
component. And then I have the question on that same page. You said coding will be informed by Durbin's sense-making methodology. What do you mean by that?
Excuse me for jumping in.
No, we talked about that
I
earlier.
noticed
Yeah.
that- I noticed that, and I'm sorry I didn't catch it sooner. That's just a boo-boo.
Yeah. No, yeah. She asked me about that earlier today, and I'm like, oh no, wait a minute.
That isn't what she meant to write at all, and she knows better than that, so.
And I was thinking of a case study in this case of being a more limited ethnography, that it's, I'm looking at a smaller subset.
And it is, as the dean says, it's in perfect shape to take it to that level of grounded theory. We can do that.
Okay.
So I'm wondering about some underlying assumptions.
Okay.
And so, I mean, I haven't actually read your proposal, but what I'm hearing is that you have a strong belief that gaming can be a part of social change.
Mhm.
And that you are interested in this population to be more representative and to sort of, am I sort of?
Well, so Games for Social Change is actually a category of games. They have a conference every year. That there is a subgroup of gamers that is their intention, is to make games that elicit this social change.
So, and you seem to be very careful in wanting to get like a diverse sample.
Mhm.
I'm wondering how much class plays into your equation here. Because,
That is a good question. Yeah.
I mean, the women coming from a working class background, for example, are going to have much different sorts of belief structures than, computer scientists, and I'm assuming most of these people have some deep background in computer science. I mean, not just the gamers, but those creating. So, I'm wondering how you're accounting for those, which seem to me to be a very large and unspoken part of American culture.
Sure, and your level of exposure to technology would definitely depend on the your economic background, that you may not necessarily have a platform. Yeah, and that's a good question, and right now it isn't something that I'm addressing in the study.
Other questions?
I have a question that follows on Dr. Spotswood's question. So you said you're actually concerned that you will not get a very diverse group from the big squad. I'm interested, your statistics from the beginning, your 24% of women. Do you know within that 24% of women how diverse that population is? Do you have, are there statistics available?
I tried to find something that would break it down further, and you know, instead I just found you know, either they broke it down by ethnicity or they broke it down by gender, but not by both. I'll dig deeper to see if I can find it.
Because I actually wondered when you're expressing that concern about that, but then when I'm looking at your almost 50-50 male-female gamers.
Yeah. And they found that actually that statistic, the Pew statistic, I could tell you that they, you know, they found almost 50-50 played games, and that ethnically that it was very close to the U.S. population, that there wasn't a diversity problem with players.
So the population of gamers,
right, is
reflective of the general population breakdown.
Right.
But you're concerned that the population you're actually looking at is not or will not be.
Right.
But I guess my other question for you is, following on to some point on the question before, you're sounding as if that is somehow an aberration and that somewhere there are all these diverse, independent game creators. But I'm wondering, is that really a fair assumption?
Well,
so
the aberration.
Your population that you're going to get, whoever they turn out to be, in fact, representative of the actual game writers rather than the game players?
Well, that's a good question. Mostly my concern is that it's a regional concern, that the Pacific Northwest, like Portland and specifically, is 80% white. The population of the U.S. is not 80% white. So you know, I don't know to what degree that's reflective of independent game designers as a whole, but geographically, it would make sense that, you know, if they took a random sampling, that the pig squad would be 80% white. So, you know, that's my concern, is that there just won't be the population available to sample from.
Okay, thank you.
So looking at your methods, I wanted to encourage you to think about what you want to get out of the online survey. Because as I read through the questions, even something I'm really passionate about, I would get pretty tired after maybe question 4 to go into this depth. So like, do you really need all of these questions? Are some of them more important? Can you get rid of some of them? And then my other thing is 100 responses to 7 open-ended questions is a lot to analyze.
Sure.
So I would just think, I know you don't want to go the qualitative route, the quantitative route, but if there's anything that you could go that route that might help you in the analysis piece. I think the interview questions look really appropriate. And I personally, I would just say conduct 20 interviews, some with men, some with women, and compare it that way. But if you feel like you need this online survey piece and want a bigger picture, I would just think about which questions you absolutely have to ask and how you're going to go about analyzing such a large number of responses.
So it looks like it's more questions than it actually is, because it's actually only 8 questions. That the sub questions are just designed to keep people focused. But yeah, you know, I'll need to consult about that.
About it too.
Yeah.
We've been talking about it even today, and I know she's tried really hard to follow the pattern that Dr. Koh has set in her own study, but there is some reasonableness here about how much can really be accomplished. So we've got to make a good decision about that, and I'm glad you mentioned it, because we really wanted to hear that other people think so too.
Yeah, because no one stole my comment. I had some of the same thoughts, not only about the number of questions, but you move away from the ability to compare with your only interviewing your substructure interviews being only with women. Now you lost that comparison.
Okay.
So I much like the idea of sort of
compressing it into just interview.
And and then perhaps pulling a sample from that for interviews or something.
Yeah, I was concerned that I wanted to make sure that I was using 3 methods of data collection, but you know, if it would be appropriate to compress that into just the interviews, yeah, that's something to look at.
Thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to echo, I think, some of the concerns I heard expressed by Dr. Koh. What I'm seeing is, I'm not seeing a clear alignment between your literature review, your research problem, your methods, your expected results. I think what she had mentioned was your research problem that you stated was kind of a misrepresentation, underrepresentation of women in the independent gaming community. You're clearly interested and you're involved in the gaming community. And so yeah, and I definitely share your concern about, you mentioned the gamer being the violence against women. I don't think that serves as a research problem. It doesn't support this type of research. Like if you want to study information behavior, I'm just not seeing the connection there. So it seems kind of like an arbitrary choice. You yourself mentioned you wanted to do information behavior because you felt like, well, this is the library information community. I would say, and I would urge you, don't feel constricted by field. If you are interested in underrepresentation of women or violence against women, this is not maybe what you want to study. You want to study something else, do something like what Dr. Zhang was recommending, like an ethnography. That's really what your proposal was reading as. So I was really interested in just reading it. I wasn't interested in, oh, what is the information behavior of women? That doesn't really come out at all. And so that's just my concern. I think maybe as you move forward in the research, maybe that'll be clearer to you. Maybe you can change direction. I would just say don't feel limited by like you have to meet the expectation of like the field or something like that. Do something that you really care about.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments?
Can I have one more question?
Please do, please.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about the research questions, and I know we discussed it before. So, are you sticking to that major question, like what can librarians and this is your research questions. I feel like your participants design has to change to test if what they learn. So I kind of propose you modify the research questions, like for example, what are the information behavior of winning game designers or something. I don't know what others think about that, but I think that your findings can generate really great implications for librarians and other educators, but that's like your findings. I'm not completely sure this is your research question.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Unless there's something more, we will end this session, and Marziah's committee will meet for just a few minutes. And we thank you all for coming. Thank you.